So this video lesson is going to be about screenplay writing, so how to write a script for a film. The software we're using, it's a free website, it's called celltex.com. And the good thing about this software is it very closely replicates Final Draft. Final Draft is the screenwriting software that people use, but this is very similar to it, and it's got all the same tabs. The thing about writing a screenplay is you need to know exactly how to do it. You need to follow the layout of screenplay writing very, very accurately. Now, the reason for this is that, I mean, you know, from a school point of view, if you're following accurately, you'll get more marks for it because you'll be showing that you can replicate how a screenplay is put together. Within the industry itself, you need to be able to follow this structure, because otherwise your work just won't be read by anyone. So if you send something that's not properly formatted to a movie executive or producer, they'll just trash it out of hand. They won't even look at it. So what you do, you'll sign in, you'll need an email address, you need a password. It will take you through all sorts of things, and it'll ask you at some point probably to pay for it. Don't pay for it. There'll be an option somewhere, probably in the small print, saying, no, I want to use this for free. So use that one. So use the free version of it. And once you're all signed in, the screen should look something like this. So what you want to do is you push new project here, and what it brings up is this. And it's really important here that the icon that you press is film and TV, because otherwise it will come up with a really weird document that's not for screenplay writing. So we press this, film and TV, and I'm just gonna call this demo. It says on the right hand side here 1 episode. That's if you were writing television, so it will just default to 1 episode, and if it's film you're writing, just leave it at that. Okay, so there is something here that you can actually upload other scripts that you've previously written. So if you do have your own software, you can apparently put it on Celltex, but I've never tried that. So I put in the title, there we go, and create project. And what it will come up with now is screenplay, index cards, and storyboard. Now, I don't really use these. With index carding, what I do with index carding is I actually do it by hand. I write out on my plan on index cards, literally on cards with a pen, and lay them out on a table and sort of rearrange them so that I've got my story structure. Apparently you can do it on Celltex, but I've never used that before. And you can apparently also storyboard on here. What I'm going to take you through today is screenplay writing. So first thing we do, click on screenplay. And this, with Celltex, for some reason, it takes absolutely ages to load. Right, so 3 hours later, once it's actually loaded, what you'll be looking at is a sheet of paper that looks like this. The way to use this is, I wouldn't particularly use any of these. You don't, generally speaking, need to do any bold or italics or underlining. What you will need to use, though, is this. So this drop-down menu, these have the different tabs on them. So you wouldn't use act particularly. You'll definitely need scene heading, action, character, dialogue, parenthetical. I wouldn't use any of these. I very, very rarely use transition shots. I've never used this before, shot and text, so I wouldn't use them. The ones you want to be looking at: scene heading, action, character, dialogue, parenthetical. So when you open the document, it defaults to scene heading. This is called it's called a scene header or a slug line. And what I'm going to do for this, I wrote a script a little while ago. I'm just going to kind of copy it out so you can see how it's put together. And I'll just sort of talk you through it as we go along. So the first thing you always write in a script is either going to be interior or exterior. Okay. Does it take place inside or outside? Occasionally, very occasionally, you might have interior/exterior. Now that's for good examples of that would be, let's say you've got somebody having a conversation on a doorstep and one person's outside and one person's inside. You don't want to constantly say cut between interior and exterior, so you just put interior/exterior. Other times this is really useful is if you're ever writing a film that's got a car journey in it. Let's say you're writing a car journey, you would write something along the lines of car, brackets, travelling, and then slash road day, something like that. So what that means is we're inside the car, but we're also outside on the road, and it's taking place in the daytime. So that's the only, there's very few occasions where you use interior / exterior, but this one's a really good one because chances are if you're filming something on the road, you want to cut between the people inside the car. Quite often you have the camera outside the car looking in through the windscreen. Sometimes you have exterior shots of the road as the car travels into the distance. So sometimes you're going to have an interior / exterior that will look like that. This is just a personal preference for me. I used to work in a script company, and the Sluglines, we would always put whether a vehicle was travelling or stationary. So yeah, there you go, interior car, exterior road day. So that's an example of that. Other times that you might use interior exterior would be, even if you've got a convertible car, or let's say you're on some sort of enclosed balcony, or if you're in a football stadium that's sort of half inside, half outside. For the purpose of this, I'm going to start with interior. So interior, first thing you put is where is this taking place? So we know it's either inside or outside, and we go to where it's taking place. So my film is shot in Martin family home, and then you also need to say which room it's in. This is really important because the chances are you'll be going from one room to another. So for my script, it starts in the kitchen. So I'm in interior family home kitchen. I've also put in mind, I'm not going to put this in now because it's confusing, but I've also put in mind the fact that it takes place in South Manchester, and I've put the date as well. Don't worry about that for the time being unless it's really important to your story. Okay, so interior Martin family home kitchen, and then this is going to take place in the morning in my script. So a couple of things to remember when you're doing this. Always people always get this wrong for some reason. You always use dashes in between the scene, the components of the slug line. Remember, there's always a space here between interior and the first part of the slug line. Use space, dash, space. Then you get to the end of this one, space, dash, space. Now, really important that you are consistent with your slug lines. Now, so what I mean by that is don't call this Martin family home to start with, and then a bit later in the script you call it Martin's family home, and a bit later on you call it Martin household. Make sure it's consistent throughout, and the reason for this is that if you were actually making this film, one thing that the software allows you to do is to group together everything that takes place in the same location so that you can shoot them all at the same time. So in my script, if I ask for, all right, I want all scenes with interior Martin family home kitchen morning, it will be able to give me every scene where that takes place. And the problem is if I put Martin household for one of my slug lines, it will mean that search won't find it, and I'll turn up for the day and I'll realise I've got extra to shoot there. The other thing is that some people, when they're writing, they write something like interior kitchen morning, interior living room morning. But you need to say the sort of larger building to start with, and then what room it occurs in. Okay, so that for me is a pretty good slug line. Interior Martin family home morning, kitchen morning. So if you just look up here where it's the scene heading, when I press enter, it automatically defaults to action. And what that tells you is that after every slug line that you write, the first thing that you need to have is action. Don't go straight in with dialogue because we need to know a little bit more about what is in this scene. So for my script, I'm just going to copy out the first part and then I'll talk you through it. So this is the first part of my script. So generally speaking, I mean, usually if you're in a room, you're probably going to have someone in that room. So the first port of call is to say, well, who's there? Okay, so who's there and what they're doing. So my character's name is Amy Martin. she's at the kitchen table and this is what she's doing. She's packing a picnic. And then I've put how old she is and then just a little bit of information about her as well. I put that she's got a tiredness in her eyes. Okay. The next thing I've done now, the next thing is I've started a new paragraph. Okay. The decor is slightly old-fashioned, lacking in mod cons. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start a new paragraph. Okay. The reason I do this is because movie executives, they don't like reading large chunks of text. So whenever you're writing action, you need to keep it as minimal as possible. So it's almost like it means that they'll be able to keep concentrating on it and their thoughts won't wander to, how much money they have. Okay, so there's the usual fare. I'm going to carry on writing. There's the usual fare, such as Right, so that's my next paragraph. Again, whenever you're writing something like this, I always like to keep each paragraph usually not more than a couple of sentences long. It's just to kind of chunk up your writing, and it also helps you to ensure that what you are writing is as minimal as possible. So you don't want it to be overly verbose. You don't want loads and loads of descriptions here. A caveat to that is that if you're doing like A-level, for example, and you're handing in a script, a screenplay, one of the things that they like in their marking is they want lots of mise-en-scène in there. So actually I wouldn't do this in real life. If I were writing a script to send to a movie executive, I would never do this in real life. But in the exams, they like you to write large bits of mise-en-scène. So for example, where you describe Amy Martin at the start, you would probably describe exactly what she's wearing, what her hair looks like, the fact that she's wearing tortoiseshell glasses. You do all sorts of things about what characters look like. You describe the kitchen in a bit more detail, but please, that's just for the exam. That's not what you'd do if you were actually writing this as a screenplay. I think one thing this opening does is it creates a little bit of kind of intrigue. So we're at a normal kitchen. She's packing a picnic. We don't know why she's packing it. We've got this slightly old-fashioned kitchen. We sort of wonder why she's in her mid-30s and she's living in a slightly old-fashioned kitchen. And then we've also got this kind of weird picnic that she's packing as well. So yeah, she's got salad, chicken, should be a comma there. Oh, make sure that your writing is grammatically correct, not like mine just was. Okay, salad, chicken, French bread, flask of tea. Double dashes work well. I think when you're writing screenplay in the action, not in the slug line, if ever you need to write a sort of continuation in the action, use double dashes rather than a single dash. So there we go. We got this slightly weird addition to the picnic that she's preparing: cardboard spittoons, protein shakes, cotton swabs. So immediately we're thinking, well, I wonder why she's packing those. So I've got my three short paragraphs to start with. I've introduced my character. Just one thing to note from this, and I see this quite a lot in screenplays, is that people aren't consistent with tense. So whenever you're writing, just always use present tense. Yeah, there is. The decor is, Amy is. Don't fall into the habit of sort of writing in past tense. People quite often do this, which I understand. It's completely it's completely natural that you would want to do this because you want to set the scene, you want to say where something's taking place. We are in the kitchen of the Martin family home, it's morning. Now the reason you'd never write this is because it's in the slug line. You don't repeat the slug line. You don't need to say we're down by the bank on a river, we're sort of on a train, we're in a car, because it should already be in the slug line. So don't fall into that habit of repeating what's in the slug line in the action. Okay, right, so there we go. Next thing I'm going to do, the packing done. The packing done. Whoops, I'm a terrible typist, so you'll just have to bear with me. Now, I'm a big fan of doing this. She goes to colon. Now, this tells me that I'm going to go from one scene to the next. Now, I press enter, and it defaults to action, as I'm expecting it to. But actually, I'm going to start a new slug line here. So I'm going to go scene heading. And now I'm going to write my second slug line. Now, as soon as I type in interior, the computer, because it's quite intuitive, it remembers that at one point I've also written Martin family home kitchen morning. What I'm going to do is, rather than type in Martin family home again, because I want my slug lines to be consistent, I'm just going to press enter there, and I'm going to change this bit. So what Amy is doing, she's going from the kitchen into the living room. Now, the fact that Amy's going from the kitchen into the living room, that suggests to me that the kitchen and the living room are next door to each other. If there were a hallway in between, I wouldn't be able to do this, because what I'm doing is I'm also going to put continuous here. Now, what continuous means is that this act of going to the next room means that there's no break between one scene and another. Now, one thing I was talking about at the start, oh yeah, and that's what that continuous means. So that just means no break there. Now, one thing I was talking about at the start, I see this all the time. I can see how it's tempting to do it, but I mentioned this already. People do this, cut to. Now, that's a transition on the right-hand side, but to my mind, there's never really any reason to put a transition in. Firstly, because you're a scriptwriter, not a director. Secondly, they clutter the page, and like thirdly, if this is a cut to, well, of course it's a cut to. What else is it going to be? The only one I ever use, this is just personal as well, is smash cut to. So smash cut is where something sudden happens. So let's say we're at the start of Die Hard with a Vengeance, and it's a really quiet street. It's the morning. It's, I want to say, New York City. And suddenly there's this explosion from one of the buildings. That would be a smash cut, because it's taken us from one area to another one with a completely kind of cataclysmic event. But generally speaking, that transition button, just forget it's even there. Don't even use it. What I'm going to do here is Amy enters. Now they always tell you to write what you know. And when I was writing this script, I just thought of what my grandfather's house used to be like. And my grandfather had one of those old gas fires that he'd light with a taper. He had wallpaper on the walls. Just in terms of consistency, now at the start of this screenplay, I'm calling this a settee. And this will sound like a really sort of minor point, but I think it's quite important. I'm calling it a settee now. Don't fall into the habit of later on calling it a couch, and then another time calling it a sofa. If it's a settee at the start, it's a settee all the way through the screenplay. The other thing that you quite often get with that is if people have got guns in screenplays, you'll see it described as a gun, and then a bit later on a handgun, and then it's a pistol, and then it's changed to like a Kalashnikov, and then it's an M16, and guns sort of change from one to another. If you call it a gun to start with, just call it a gun all the way through. So there you go, an old settee, mantelpiece over gas fire, dated wallpaper, just setting the scene there. One thing to note is that when I first introduce Amy, I use capital letters. Afterwards in the script, she's just going to be known as Amy, and I don't use capital letters for it because I've already introduced her. So the first time, you don't have to use surnames, but the first time you ever introduce somebody, you always write it in capital letters, and then later on you don't need to. So some people use capital letters all the way through a screenplay. I've always used this convention. So capital letters start with, there we go. Now, seated in the armchair is her father. Now her father I'm introducing for the first time, I'm going to use capitals, is her father Bill Martin. Now I want to give a little bit of description about him. So it might be noted, now I've broken my own rule here. I just told you never to use more than 2 sentences in a paragraph. I've broken my own rule because it's a character description about somebody, and there's no way I can really break this up into separate paragraphs. Possibly I could do this potentially, but for me it all seems to lead on one to the next. So I've introduced him, capital letters there, might be noted, family portraits, and this tells. What I'm not doing here is I'm not going, cut to close-ups of family portraits on mantelpiece, because I'm not a director and I'm not giving any camera directions in this. I think this is really important that you don't give camera directions. You don't say close-up, you don't say that the camera tracks in, because that's what the director does. So all I'm saying is, look, in this room there are some family portraits around the room, and they show that he was once a robust man. It's up to the director to choose how he shows those family portraits. And then, some quite nice short sentences here. With a screenplay, it needs to be grammatically correct, but I've got a couple of examples here of sentences that technically aren't grammatically correct. These are fragment sentences. A shadow of a man, early 70s. It's nice and snappy. It's concise. It's succinct. But it gives a real sense of what this, who this man is. He's in his early 70s, but he's a shadow of a man. There's nothing else to him. I just wanted to say a few words on your slug line as well, just while I think about it. There's lots of different things that you would write in a slug line at this part. Generally speaking, the most common ones are day or night. If it's evening tends to be that sort of time you're sitting down with your dinner and watching EastEnders or whatever you're doing. That kind of time between, let's say, I don't know, 6 and 10 o'clock in the evening. Night tends to be the small hours. It tends to be kind of 11 o'clock, midnight, late into the night. Sometimes you use dawn, sometimes you'll use dusk if it's really important, if it's absolutely key to the screenplay. If it's really, really important, you might give a specific time. So it might be, there used to be a show on called 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, and it was, the whole series was supposed to replicate, it was shot in real time. So it was really important in the slug lines for that if it's 3:30 in the afternoon or 3:35 in the afternoon, then that's in the screenplay. But we're using continuous here because it's still morning. She's going from one scene to the next. The other thing, I'm just on that note, talking about, and sorry to be, to go on about this, but talking about being grammatically correct, one thing that cell text doesn't do, and in fact, I'm gonna show you this, because I fall into this trap sometime. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is, the next thing I want is dialogue. So what I do is I go to character. So this tab here, character, and the first person who's going to speak is going to be Amy. So I type in Amy and it automatically puts capital letters onto it. Press enter and it assumes that the next thing I'm doing is dialogue. So you can see here it's already assumed that I'm going to write dialogue. So Amy says to her father, she's going to say, "Have you seen the picnic blanket, Dad?" Now, if I start typing that, have you, I find this little quirk of cell text that students kind of get into this all the time. I'm forever changing capital letters. It doesn't auto-correct the capitals, so you have to put those capitals in yourself. And it seems like a minor point, but when it comes to marking it, if I'm handed in a piece of work that's got a lowercase at the start of dialogue, of course I'm going to take marks off for it because it's not accurate. Have you seen? Okay, there's my first piece of dialogue. Now I press enter and you can see what happens. So you've just finished this line. When I press enter, again, it's quite intuitive. It assumes that she's talking to somebody. So probably the next thing that's going to happen is that somebody's going to talk to her. And that's exactly what happens in my script. So Bill replies. Now I press enter and it takes me to dialogue. But actually for me, I don't want to go to dialogue next. I want to go to this one, which is parenthetical. Now, parenthetical tells you how something is said and sometimes to whom it's said. So it might be, let's say we've got 4 people in the room and Amy says, "Have you seen the picnic blanket, Dad?" It might be that Bill completely ignores her and says to somebody else, "Tell her not to speak to me." And in which case you need to say what's being spoken to whom. But for this, because it's really important to me in this script that I need to establish the fact that this is quite a weak man, I'm going to press enter there, and then you can see up in the dialogue that it's assumed that after I put the parenthetical in, there's going to be dialogue. So what he says is, "No dear, did you check the cupboard?" So there we go. I've got, "Have you seen the picnic blanket, Dad?" "No dear, did you check the cupboard?" So all well and good. And now I press enter again. And this is something that cell text doesn't do, but Final Draft does do, is it assumes that Amy is going to speak next. But if I type in A, it should be the case that it brings up, because the software remembers who was speaking, who has spoken so far. So it might be that I've got someone called Amy, I've got someone called Andrew, I've got someone called Agatha, it will remember all those beginning with A, and it will bring up a list of options. So you can see it's highlighted Amy on there. All I need to do is press enter, and then it brings up Amy's name, and then press enter again for dialogue. And then she says, which one? A word on parenthetical. Parenthetical can only ever go at the start of speech or midway through speech. You would never ever put it at the end of speech. I've seen this a few times where people will write a speech and then there'll be a bit of parenthetical after it. The other thing, again, this is something, just a personal preference of mine. When you write parenthetical, I don't like it to go more than 2 lines. I generally think parenthetical should just be on 1 line. If you have to go over onto a second line, the chances are it might actually look better in the action column. So generally speaking, you keep parentheticals to 1 line, either at the start of speech or midway through. I'm just going to carry this on. So it assumes that I've pressed enter, I press BI, see I've pressed Bill and it immediately thinks that it's going to be Bill that comes up. I press enter, enter again to get me into the dialogue column. Now, what happens next in my screenplay is that Amy's going to go, she's going to exit. And there's lots of ways you could think about doing this. It might be the fact that I stay on Amy, that I follow her as she goes upstairs. In fact, in my script, what I want to do is I'm going to stay on Bill. Okay, so first thing, it thinks that I'm carrying on with the dialogue, so I need to tell the software that actually I'm going to go to action now. So I bring up my little drop-down menu here, and I go to action, and it tabs across to the left-hand side of the screen. So Amy exits. Now, this is when I used to write in this this post-production script company. I remember one of the first things my boss told me was that in a screenplay, you very, very rarely write something like Amy appears or Amy disappears, or materializes. If you were to do that, it's generally, you're talking about someone who's a magician, because they're suddenly like appearing in a puff of air and disappearing. Generally speaking, if someone goes out of a room, it just either exits, or if they come in, enters. It's the easiest way to do it, and it saves a lot of that sort of confusion. And you don't need to write stuff like Amy exits through the doorway, because it's assumed that she doesn't sort of run headlong into the wall and smash her way through it. Okay, so Amy exits. We stay on Bill. Now, what I've done here, I quite like this sort of way of writing. I told you not to put in camera movements, but you can. I quite like the use of the word we. Okay, so we follow Bill. We stay on Bill. We follow Bill as he stands and goes over to the window. So that we, I mean, it's heavily implied there that that's what the camera's going to do. So if you find that you really want to put in a camera movement, try using we instead. Please note as well that this is still all in present tense. There's no past tense in it, all consistent with tense. Okay, so he looks ahead, breathing. It's not a very pleasant script, this, by the way. It's pretty disgusting. I should also say as well that what I'm doing at the moment is I've already written the script and I'm actually copying it off a different laptop screen. I don't actually write this quickly. I'm actually a very, very slow writer, and it takes me quite a long time to put these sort of paragraphs together. So don't watch this and think, oh well, the typing in that is, the ideas are just sort of flowing and they're coming to me as if in some sort of dream state. The whole process of this, I wrote 3 scripts as a sort of, this is the first one of a trilogy, and all in all, it took me about, I don't know, it's taken me at least 10 years to write them all properly. I'm not saying it'd take me 10 years to write one of the actual scripts, but it takes a long time to get the ideas together. The other really important thing is that you should think about this as a process. So it's highly likely that you'll write a screenplay and then you'll get to the end of it and you'll have to go back and edit it afterwards. And the editing for me is the really, really important part of writing. It's where your ideas, you begin to streamline your ideas. You look through from it's not just about looking through for mistakes, although that's part of it. But my own personal take on how to do this would be that you write something and then you leave it for at least a week. I know this isn't always possible at school, but I'm talking a bit more generally. You leave it for at least a week, preferably a month, and you very strict with yourself. You don't allow yourself to look at it at all. And then you go back to it after a month, and it should be that almost like you're reading a completely different script, that you've never read it before, that you can't remember various bits in it. The other thing I really like to do, and this isn't, particularly, this is a bit old-fashioned now because people don't print stuff onto paper, but I find if I've written a script and I see it on the computer, on a computer screen, if I print it off, it looks completely different to me, and it almost looks like something I haven't written. So that printing off process, another really useful thing of having it on paper in front of you, is get yourself a big black marker pen and cross out bits that you don't want in there anymore. And it's a really kind of satisfying process as much as anything, because you gradually, you think, oh wow, I can really streamline this. I can really make this writing a lot more concise, a lot more dynamic. And you can literally physically see it on the page in front of you because you've crossed it all off with a big black marker pen. Just to give you a couple of examples of this, the first screenplay I ever wrote, and it wasn't very good, it was years and years ago, but the first draft of it was I think it was 130 pages long, and after I'd edited it, I got it down to 68 pages. I also like writing novels, and my first ever, I've just finished one actually, that the first draft of it was 202,000 words, and by the time I'd finished editing it, I'd got it down to 115,000. So speaking from my own experience, and people write in different ways and they do these things in all sorts of different ways. Speaking from my own experience, my editing process generally, I'd be looking to take about almost half the text out that was in there originally. And just to put it into perspective how slow a writer I am, my last novel, it took me about 7 years to write it, 5 years to write the first draft, and 2 years to edit it. I press enter again, and what I'm going to do now is something, if I go to character, person who's going to speak is going to be Amy, so I type in A, press enter. Now, there's a problem here. Amy's going to speak in this scene. The problem I've got is that she's not actually in the scene anymore. So she's going to be talking to her father, but she's not there. And that creates a problem, because if I were to put this in, what she says is it's not here. If I were to put that in, I'd think, yeah, but hang on a sec, she's not in the room, so how can she be speaking? So what I need to do there is, here we put in OS. Now what OS means is off screen. Some people do it as, there's no right or wrong way to do this, it's either OS or OC. OC means off camera and OS means off screen. Again, be consistent. I use off screen here, so I use it throughout the whole thing. So there you go. That's I think that covers most of the sort of main aspects of script writing. There's another couple of things I quite like to do. I'm just going to put this in the action as an example. If you want to have a pause, just a couple of ways of doing that. You either write pause, and these are really useful because they help you to break up your writing. Pause means a sort of, a lengthy pause, like a pregnant pause, as it's sometimes known. The other one I really like using is beat. Now, what beat means is there's just a little pause, and it's often quite a significant pause. So let's say this isn't actually what's in the original script, but when he says, "No, dear, did you check the cupboard? Which one?" and he says, "The airing cupboard on the landing," that beat, it might suggest that she was a little bit irritated by what he'd said because she doesn't reply to it immediately. "The airing cupboard on the landing. I'll have a look." So that beat could be really significant in the way that the actors read the lines and the way it's directed. One other thing I just wanted to talk about was really, really long tracks of dialogue. So let's say the very first speech, let's say he carries on speaking and you've got this really long piece of dialogue that goes all the way down to, let's say it fills half a page. It's fine if you do that. It's fine if you have really long bits of dialogue, but what you should always think about is if somebody's speaking and there's a really long piece of dialogue, what are the other characters doing at that time? I mean, if you've got someone like, if you read a soliloquy by Shakespeare, obviously really, really long speeches, and it was up to the actors to decide what they were doing, and it was up to the actors delivering the speeches to kind of interpret it. You don't really get that in screenplays. So if ever you've got a very, very long piece of dialogue, always think about, well, can I break it up a little bit? And how can I break it up? It might be the case, let's say I've got this bit and it was a long bit of dialogue. It might be the case that I come here and I say something like, Bill reacts. And reacts covers a multitude of sins. It means that they've listened to what someone said and they've reacted in a certain way. And then Amy could carry on speaking after that. The other way to do it would be, so what that would mean is I've got Amy here and then Amy, and then maybe he sort of shifts in his seat uncomfortably, and then Amy carries on speaking, and then maybe Bill throws his wine glass against the wall because he's furious, and then Amy carries on speaking. And the other way you can do it is you can just you could almost set it up in the action to start with to describe what the characters are doing during that long bit of speech, or you could break it up with parentheticals as well. So these bits, you can break it up, you can put them in the middle of the bits of dialogue. So there we go. So my kind of, I don't know, parting from this video, my sort of parting words of wisdom would be just to, when you first start out writing, just write and write and write. And the other useful bit of advice that I could give you would be that try not to edit too much as you're going along. Don't sort of you write sort of the first half of it and you think, oh man, I should have changed that at the start, and you go back and you change the start, and you think, oh, I should have changed that next bit, and you change that. What I would do is write the whole draft to start with and then go back and make your changes. You can work with a little notebook next to you, I think is quite a good way of doing it. And you can just track, which changes you want to make, and you can just write a little note for yourself. Otherwise, it's really going to disrupt the flow of your writing. Although I said don't edit it as you're going along, quite a nice way to work is, let's say I finish there for today. The next time I read this script, I might go back and just start editing from here, just to edit the last scene, so it sort of tricks me into writing it again. I think that's quite a good way of sort of getting back into writing. And the final bit of advice is that sometimes if you leave your own writing on a cliffhanger, so you're really excited about writing the next part, don't leave it on a bit that's really difficult to carry on the next day. Leave yourself wanting to write the next bit. That covers most of the the specifics, the technical side of it.